Hello, everyone. I would like to extend warm greetings to all of you and welcome to this course, Theology 11N, fourth quarter. I am Julius-Kei. I'm your instructor, and I'm sending you greetings from halfway around the globe here in London, Ontario, Canada. So I'm so far away from you, and our time difference is also great. We are minus 12 compared to Manila time. So I will be doing these weekly, I hope, pre-recorded lectures in order to help you uh, in your quest, in your efforts to deepen yourselves in theology. So I would like to remind everyone that these pre-recorded lectures uh, are very important and very crucial for this course. And I would like you to prioritize the content of what we will be discussing in these pre-recorded lectures. So, just a little about myself. I am, although I've been living outside of the Philippines for more than half of my 55 years of life, I am a Manileño born and bred. Mom's Filipina, and my dad is Japanese, hence the last name Kato. People here in Canada call me Kato, and I've stopped correcting them. Here I'm known as Julius-Kei Kato, but let's pronounce it the right way. It's in Japanese, it's Kato, but in the Philippines, we are called the Katos. So let's start our common effort to learn theology and how it can help us, especially in our concrete path of life. So let me share my screen with you so that we can go to our subject matter. Okay, so for our first lecture, um, this will be devoted to practically learning all the important concepts that we will be using and studying throughout this quarter. So, what are these concepts? So, first of all, um, critical thinking. This is something that we professors encourage our students at the college level, at the university level to have. So, critical thinking, if we can begin describing it, is the readiness to question everything. By virtue of critical thinking, nothing can expect to go on being taken for granted. Everything is subject to critical inspection. And this might seem a contradiction with regard to faith because sometimes we think of faith and beliefs, religious beliefs, as just um, we having to accept them on faith without questioning. But when we're studying religion, theology at the college or university level, we have to be able to use our critical thinking. Um, and although theology is ultimately based on faith, it is studying something from a stance of faith. Um, Critical thinking is still very important. We have to use our reasoning in order to strengthen faith, support faith, and to have a more responsible and mature and more adult faith. So, critical thinking is the first thing I would like to recommend to everyone. Um, I do not like to have too long of a pre-recorded video lecture, so sometimes I'll just gloss over things, just mention them in passing. And these are some of the most important functions of critical thinking. And I'd like you to go over them more slowly or watch that video YouTube link that I put on Canvas. Okay. So let's go to the heart of the matter. These are some of the more directly related concepts that I'd like to explain in this first lecture. So, first, the concept of religion. And then, related with religion is spirituality. Connected in turn to spirituality are the terms spirit and soul, and we'll explain those later. And then, of course, faith is a component of religion and spirituality. So we will discuss faith extensively. What is faith? And I'd like to emphasize faith as a kind of trust. What's the difference between faith and belief, or in the plural form, beliefs? And then toward the end, we will discuss what theology is. That's what we are trying to engage ourselves in here. And how does it compare and contrast with the discipline called religious studies? So, this in short will be the outline of today's lecture. And by the way, in your reactions, you can also use Filipino or Tagalog. As I said, I am a born and bred Manileño, so I will be able to understand that very well. Okay, okay, let's begin with religion and being religious. So I think it's good to begin with the etymology, the word origin of a term. So the word religion, English word religion, comes from the Latin word or Latin components re and ligare. And that means to connect, that's ligare, again. And that's what the component re means. So religion, if you take it in its etymological meaning, is to connect again. So, of course, when we speak about connecting again, we can link that with the function of religion to connect God and humans, the divine and human beings again. If we use the word again, then it's presupposed that there was some kind of rupture. Uh, and so religion's function is to make that connection between the divine and the human once again. Now, religion can also be described as ultimate concern. This comes from a Protestant theologian named Paul Tillich. So I am living here in the West, in Canada. I've been in the West for a long time now, also in Europe and then now in North America. But uh, here, lots of people are questioning even the existence of God or of uh, spiritual realities. So uh, the context I'm working in is a so called secularized context where lots of people do not take belief in God to be granted. Okay, they question that belief. And of course, since the Philippines is, in a way, influenced very deeply by Western trends, I know, especially in the urban areas, that this is also beginning to happen in the Philippines. So, for these people who are situated in a secular context, then this definition of religion might make more sense. Uh, Tillich said that religion has something to do with ultimate concern, what counts most in life. So, usually, uh, this concern is directed toward an ultimate, transcendent, or divine being. If someone believes in God, but if someone doesn't believe in those things, in God, in the spiritual dimension, then that person's religion can be described as what moves this person in an ultimate way, the highest concern for this person. That is this person's religion. So we have to point out also that religion influences one's behavior and style of life in a crucial way. So there's an ethical dimension to religion. So let's define it. Let's define the term religion more succinctly and clearly. So I can say, or we can say, that religion is something like a worldview. It's the way how you view life, the world, reality. And second, it's also a way of life. It should affect your concrete living, your behavior. But not only that, when we talk of religion as a worldview and a way of life, these two things are in response to something that is understood, perceived as ultimate. So, in our context, that ultimate being is usually called God or Dios in Tagalog. Okay, so I'd like to make a distinction also between first-hand religion and second-hand religion. And I get these terms from the philosopher of religion, William James. So, first-hand religion, if we may describe it, is, or let's begin with secondhand religion. Secondhand religion is a kind of religion that you received from others, let's say your parents, your community. And this is very common in the Philippines. Most of us are Catholic because we were born in a Catholic environment. We received the Catholic faith from our parents. Uh, but if we have not yet made a personal decision to appropriate this Catholic religion or faith, then it remains at the second hand religion level. We have to make it our own through a personal decision. And then, only then, does it become what James called first hand religion. It is truly ours when we've made a personal decision to appropriate, to accept that faith. Or if we do not agree anymore with the faith, then we have to be courageous and say, I think my path is a different path. So let me take this path intentionally. Then that becomes your first hand religion because you decided for yourself, okay, after having given it much thought. Um, Religion also has a necessary social dimension. That's why many of us have or started life with secondhand religion. So it can be inherited from family, from our culture, and it almost always involves a community. Although religion um, can be appropriated also at the personal level, and it has to be, there's always a communitarian dimension, and we will study that more when we go to the topic called church, which ultimately means a community of believers. So, yes, there is a social dimension to religion, but it should also be a personal decision. Ideally, it should involve a personal appropriation of that religious faith. So, once again, that is firsthand religion. Now, we describe religion as a worldview. So, a worldview is how one sees, perceives, understands, interprets the world or life or human reality or existence or other things. So, this is your general view of the world. Um, and we can say that a religion gives someone, a worldview. A religion can itself be considered a worldview. And worldviews usually answer the following seven questions. They're not exhaustive. There can be more questions, but worldviews usually answer the following questions. So if you want to examine or explore your worldview as you are now, then ask yourself the seven following questions, and more or less you'll get a good idea of what your worldview is. So, question number one: what does it mean to be human? What's your description of what it means to be a human? Question number two: of course, to be human means to encounter problems. And what do you define or what do you describe as the basic human problem? And I would like to remind you that your answers to these questions usually um, give us an idea, a good indication of your worldview. But we're talking about religions here as worldviews. So, religions answer all these seven questions. What's the basic human problem? So, if I can just give stock general answers from our Catholic Christian tradition, what's the basic human problem? Sin. If we go back to question number one, what does it mean to be human? Human means to be someone in a relationship with the divine being, with the being we call God. Okay. So, question number three: what is the cause of the problem? So, again, I'm just giving you very general stock answers that we will qualify later. Okay. What's the cause of the problem? If the problem is sin, estrangement from God, then we can say that the traditional Christian answer would be it's because human beings do not follow the will of God. So there's a basic disobedience in human beings, and many of us choose to do wrong instead of good. See, so that's the cause of the problem. Question number four: what's the end or goal that humans should try to reach? A traditional Christian answer would be um, the goal that we're all striving to reach is to be united with God in the afterlife in heaven. You can revise that to even include this life. If we may use the words of Jesus from the Gospel of John, the human goal is to live life to the full, okay, more abundantly. That's from John 10, verse 10. Question number five: what are the means to reach the goal? How does one concretely reach the goal? And of course, the Christian faith has given us answers to these questions. So, uh, let's say, have faith in God, mm, attend church regularly, receive the sacraments, and so on and so forth. Okay, so those are examples of concrete means to reach the goal. And then, of course, every religion asks, what's the nature of reality? So, this is the bigger picture of reality that a religious tradition paints, and we'll speak more about that later. And question number seven is, what is God? I say, what is God, not who is God, because in other religious traditions, God is not a being. Like in Buddhism, it's a non personal being, right? Well, in Christianity and in the monotheistic religions, the religions that believe that there is one God, the ultimate being happens to be a personal being, God. See? So, this is an important question that religions strive to answer or to respond to. So, what is God? Alternative names for God could be the following: the holy, the numinous, and so on and so forth. And how may God be known? Okay, that's another thing that religion tries to respond to. So, we asked, what is reality? So, religions try to paint a what I refer to as a bigger worldview, and I'll explain that uh, now. So, all of us are very well aware that there are material, non living things like this desk, my clothes, the rocks, or the trees outside, okay? Uh, they are material, non-living beings, although plants already have life in them. So that may be, I think we should include them in the second level called material living things. So yes, even the plants are included there. Animals, so everything that has life, bios in Greek, that would be included in level number two. See, but some of these material beings that have life have advanced use of reason. For example, animals have a certain use of reason. Some animals are smarter than others, but we're referring most of all to human beings. Yes, we are also material realities. We have a body, for example, we interact with this material world, uh, but um, we also have advanced use of reason. We have intelligence. So, I point out here that conventional science acknowledges all these levels up to level number three. But especially here in the West, a lot of people um, which who we can refer to as scientific materialists say that's all there is. Um, uh, Reality is composed of material, non-living things, level one, material living things, level two, advanced intelligent beings, level number three. But they deny anything else than that because science can access and verify things that are in levels one, two, and three. However, religion makes an important addition to this. The world religions and our Christian religion says, wait, there's a bigger level than uh, dimensions one, two, three. There is a level or dimension number four, the spiritual realm, the non material realm. And this is the biggest dimension of all that encompasses all the other smaller, um, lower dimensions. So conventional science can no longer access level number four, although in the future it may. Like when we're studying quantum physics, we're going to transconventional, the things that are beyond the normal ways of science. So who knows in the future? Science might be able to access even the non-material spiritual realm, and then we can even have, perhaps, I don't know, scientific proof for that. But as of now, conventional science can only access up to level three. But religion, the world spiritual traditions say, no, there is actually level number four, there's dimension number four, which is actually the most important level, the non material level. So, if we may express that in um, a more clarified way, okay, this is how a spiritual or religious person or tradition sees reality. We know the physiosphere. I'm going to use more technical terms here. The physiosphere, which is level number one, and that's material reality. It is encompassed by a bigger biosphere, the life sphere, which is level number two. In turn, the biosphere is encompassed by a bigger noosphere. Nous is the Greek word for mind, and that's the realm of the thinking mind. Beings with advanced use of reason. And finally, the noosphere is in turn inside the biggest realm of all, the dimension of spirit. And in history, this dimension has been known in the Western religions, in the monotheistic religions, as God. So God is over everything, encompasses everything. It's within God is within everything as well as um, uh, above everything. Okay. Now, where is the human being in all of this? So, the religious traditions of the world have pointed out that um, the human person has dimensions that belong to all these levels. So we're not only material reality, we are also spiritual beings. And of course, that is reinforced by the traditional cultures, which have been uh, basically religious cultures. It's only from the modern period onwards, especially in the West, that people have started to doubt what religions have claimed for a long time and uh, turn to science as the only thing that can verify reality. And of course, that is not true because science has its limitations. Okay, so let's go further in trying to understand religion. And I find that this British scholars' seven dimensions of religion, um, this scheme is very useful for us to understand religion in a better way. So, according to Ninian Smart, um, each religion has these seven dimensions. And just to give you an idea, I'm not going into detail here because we're just at the beginning of our course. I'm trying to skim or to summarize important things. But Ninian Smart, and this is the version expressed by Paul Laughlin. But Ninian Smart said that these seven dimensions are present in all religious tradition. So there's the artistic dimension, uh, and you can read the descriptions for yourselves. The doctrinal dimension, there's the experiential dimension, there's the ethical dimension, there's the mythical dimension, the ritual dimension, and the social dimension. So if you would like to have like a balanced religiosity, then you have to incorporate all these dimensions in your life and participate in all these dimensions in the religious tradition that you belong to. Okay. So let's go to the next really important term for us during this or in the course of this quarter for this course. So I'd like to describe what spirituality is, or what does it mean to be spiritual. So, first, let's start with the relationship between spirituality and religion. And I'd like to start by uh, claiming that spirituality is the heart of religion. So, a religion without spirituality is an empty shell. There's no substance. And you may not be very familiar with walnuts, but here in Canada, we have lots of these. A walnut has an outer shell, and when you break that shell, you get the kernel, right? So we can compare to religion as the outer shell, and spirituality as that inner kernel, the substance, the meat, yung laman, as we say in Tagalog, right? So if you break a walnut and there's just the shell, it's an empty shell, then you're frustrated, right? Because you say there's no kernel inside, and that's what I want to taste. That's what I want to eat, the kernel. So that's spirituality. Um, with regard or face to face with religion. See, spirituality is that inner kernel, the heart of religion. For most of history, spirituality and religion were considered one and the same. They were essential components. But in the contemporary period, in our time, especially in the context where I'm located here in the West, people are beginning to distinguish, differentiate between these two. In fact, here in our place, one often hears people saying, I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious. And I guess even in the urban areas there in the Philippines, maybe some of you would describe yourselves as, oh, I'm spiritual, but not religious. And this is a very modern contemporary phenomenon. But in an ideal world, spirituality and religion should be together always. They are essential to each other. Okay, just like a walnut has a shell, an outer shell, and an inner kernel. So let's describe spirituality further. So again, we start etymologically. That means the word origin. So it's from spirit. And I'd like to suggest some working definitions for our terms. So, among many possible meanings, let the following be our working definition. So, first of all, spirituality has spirit. That's not a good way to define. I'm just repeating a word, but let me describe it further. So, spirit is that which is dynamic, energizing, vitalizing, igniting, moving, animating, giving life. That's the principle that is giving us life and energy. Okay. So um, that is the life giving force um, with regard to persons, animals, human groups, or even things. I get this from spirituality scholar named a scholar named David Benner. Now, there's a French expression, um, elan vital. That means a vital force. That spirit, see, it gives you force and energy. So, if you are a Star Wars fan, that can be compared to the force that is usually mentioned in the Star Wars movies. So, spirit is the energy that moves us to transcend ourselves. So it moves us to go beyond ourselves, not to be trapped in our selfish, egocentric cores or shells. Okay, it moves us to go outside. Okay, and meet other people and meet the world. So that's one component of spirituality. Now, if you use the term in a negative way, for example, he has a broken spirit. um, the dictionary definition of a broken spirit is that person is subdued or humbled in a total way. That person is without life or without energy. So now you see when we use it in a negative way that spirit means something that gives life and energy and vitality. Okay? So there's another component to spirituality that I'd like to emphasize together with the spirit dimension. Spirituality also involves a soul component. So, among many possible meanings, let the following be again another working definition. We're just using this, although there are other possible ways of defining it. So, if spirit is fire, it gives us life and energy, which if spirit makes us move out or of ourselves or transcend ourselves, what is soul? Soul is like a contrasting element, a balancing element. Soul is the one which keeps us grounded. So it makes us firmly planted on the ground. We're not like just lost in speculations or theoretical concepts. We're grounded. Okay. So, soul, again, I'm speaking about soul, is the womb of experience which contains and controls the fire and gives it direction. Because if we just have fire, if we just have that spirit component, then it might rage out of control. It might burn everything, right? You know how uncontrolled fire can be very destructive, or even uncontrolled water, floods, for example, tsunamis. We need a controlling factor, and that controlling factor, that grounding factor, is the sole component of spirituality. And I get that also from scholar David Benner. So, in short, our working definitions of spirituality is this: spirituality is composed of a spirit component, which is an outward going, active, energizing, adventurous principle, but it should also have a soul component. It's the more introspective, inward looking, depth principle that contains and controls the fire of spirit directs it to its proper object. So please bear in mind that spirituality has both spirit and soul components, and that should be kept in a balance. Okay. So, describing spirituality further. Spirituality is part and parcel of being human. Even if you don't believe in God, you should have a spirituality. And this can also be rephrased as a philosophy of life. You should have an outlook on life. So, we already said that spirituality has a depth or a grounding dimension. We describe that as soul. So, that helps us search for our deepest convictions. Sorry, that was just an alarm that went off. Okay, so if spirituality has a depth grounding dimension, it also has a moving out, extroverted, energizing dimension, which we described as spirit. Okay, so spirit as a component of spirituality helps us transcend ourselves for something bigger than ourselves. Like to give you a very common example, if you're single and you're going to get married maybe in the future, like this is a bigger responsibility. So you move out of yourself. You cannot be selfish and be married, right? That would end in destruction or a broken marriage. See, you have to be able to transcend yourself when you enter into a big relation or component as that. So and this moving out extroverted dimension is often directed to an ultimate. So, our spirituality, especially if you're a Christian, if you're a believer in God, is directed to this ultimate being, which we call God. Uh, and now I've added this because I usually talk with some students who do not believe in God. That's not a granted here in our place. So spirituality doesn't have to be directed to an ultimate. Can be focused to things in this world. It could be very worldly, this worldly. Okay, it could be the pursuit of what for us is most valuable. See, so that is another dimension of spirituality. Now, let's go to our next key term for this course, and it is theology. After all, this is a theology course. It's theology 11, right? So, what is theology? Now, this is a an article that I can recommend to you. Maybe not so much you, but my students here, some of whom do not believe in God, but study theology, even if you don't believe in God. That's the title of this uh, uh, news article here. Okay? So let's try to define theology and describe it. The classical definition of theology, and I'd like you to remember this very well, is this. Uh, it was expressed by uh, a saint in the Catholic tradition, Saint Anselm of Canterbury, and he said that theology is fides quaerens intellectum. That means faith seeking understanding. So there's already faith there. But if we want to make our faith more mature, more responsible, stronger, firmer, then we seek a deeper understanding of what we already have faith in. So that's theology. That's the process. That's the operation or enterprise called theology, attributed to St. Anselm. So I'd like you to notice that in this definition, classical definition of theology, faith is presupposed. It's presupposed here. So again, etymologically described, theology comes from the Greek word theos, meaning God, and logos, meaning word or reason or discourse. So if you combine those two components together, theology is a discourse about God. It's a discipline that concerns itself with God, about God. So, theology, from that etymological description, involves careful study, rational and critical thinking, and the subject matter is God. Okay. and it's done from a standpoint of faith. And I want to emphasize this. So when we're talking about theology, we're studying something, God and the things related to God, from a standpoint of faith. This is really a crucial um, way to describe and define theology. So theology is linked with faith. And faith, some claim, is like love. It's like a way to know some aspects of human reality of life that if we use a reason alone, we cannot understand. So, in short, if you're just very logical and you never use your heart, you cannot understand life uh, in a more wholesome way. You need both head and heart. Okay. So the French philosopher Blaise Pascal is famous for this quote. He says, "The heart has its reasons of which reason knows not." Okay, or the heart has its reasons of which reason knows nothing. And this is a quote from his uh, book Pensée, number 423. So what he means here is sometimes uh, we have to get to know things using our heart. So I'm comparing theology to that because faith as the big foundation of theology is a way to know things. There's some things that we can only know when we have faith, when we're an insider to a religious tradition. When we have faith in that religious tradition. It's also important to look at it as if we were outsiders, like studying our faith tradition as if we were outsiders. But an outsider can only grasp so much. We need an insider knowledge. So let me give you a common example. We are Filipinos. I'm not only Filipino, but I was born and raised there, so I am also a Filipino. So if I were not a Filipino, if I were like a just like a native born Canadian who went to the Philippines, I can study the culture of the Philippines very well and have uh, a lot of head knowledge. But there are some things that only a native Filipino knows, right? Because you're an insider. You grew up. You were born and grew up in that culture. So this is like faith, see? Um, you want to know a religion, religious tradition better, let's say the Christian tradition better, then there are some things that only an insider can know. And that's the role of faith. See, faith is a way of knowing things that is not accessible if you did not have that faith, and it's comparable to love. Okay. So let's contrast theology with another discipline called religious studies. Like, for example, here in the university where I teach, it's called King's University College, which is attached to a very big um, uh, state or provincial university. The Canadian provinces are like the states of the US. So we're attached to a big university called Western University, but we teach religious studies. So we don't require faith of people who come to our religious studies courses. So, what is the discipline called religious studies? Religious studies. First, I'd like to emphasize that faith is not presupposed if you're just doing religious studies. If you're doing religious studies, then you cannot presuppose faith. So, religious studies is the discipline, um, it's the critical inquiry directed at a common human phenomenon, and that human phenomenon is religion. So, you don't need faith here, you're just trying to examine religion as a human phenomenon. You don't have faith, but you're very curious about why people are religious, why every culture has had its own religious tradition, for example. So you're studying it from that very detached standpoint. Okay. When you're doing that, then you're doing religious studies and not faith, and not theology, rather. So, religious studies as a university discipline uses all the tools that critical inquiry has at its disposal. Tools such as history, critical theory, linguistics, and so on and so forth, in order to study the nature of religion. Of course, theology also uses history, critical reasoning, linguistics, and all that, but theology is done from a standpoint of faith, and that's the crucial difference. So, um, just a quick uh, quiz here. Just a quick way to distinguish, to help you distinguish between theology and religious studies. So I'll give you several statements and then try to think, is this theology or is this religious studies? So if we quote this very famous statement from the Gospel of John, chapter 3, God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, Jesus Christ, to die for our sins and save us. At its simplest level, what is that? Is that theology or religious studies? Is it a statement coming from faith, or is it like a detached, objective statement that tries to study the phenomenon called religion? And the answer, of course, is this statement is very theological. See? And the Gospels are theological documents because it tells us, it claims that um, in Jesus Christ, we see the love of God who sent Jesus Christ as a Savior. See, so it's coming from the standpoint of faith. This is a theological statement. Two, the story of Adam and Eve is the expression of the belief of ancient Hebrews that human beings were created by God and that everything comes from this same Creator God. Is this a theological statement or is it trying to study a religious phenomenon from a more detached, objective point of view, not presupposing faith? The answer, of course, would be this is a uh, statement coming from religious studies because we're just analyzing the story of Adam and Eve, and we're concluding that, uh, uh, analyzed historically, it's an expression of the belief of ancient Hebrews about the following things. See? So it's something that comes out of religious studies, not from a standpoint of faith, which is theology. Let's say you're walking outside on the streets and a guru, a spiritual looking person approaches you and tells you, it's the will of the Great Spirit that you begin this project. Is that theology or religious studies? I think you've guessed it right. It's theology. It comes from a standpoint of faith because the guru felt that he was inspired by the Great Spirit to give you this directive. So it's coming from a standpoint of faith, right? What about this? Statement number 4. What probably motivated the kamikaze pilots in World War II was the belief that the sun goddess Amaterasu will never allow Japan to be conquered by her enemies. Theology or religious studies? Again, it's religious studies because you don't need faith to analyze the belief of kamikaze pilot, the religious beliefs. Although they're religious beliefs, you're analyzing them from a detached, objective standpoint. And you're just concluding that, they believe that the sun goddess would never allow Japan to be conquered by her enemies. So, yeah, it's that which motivated them to give their lives as a sacrifice for the country. Okay, so it's a religious studies kind of statement. Okay, so we're just going to tie up things by talking about faith and beliefs, um, and of course, I would just like to make one recorded lecture and just pause and take appropriate breaks, okay? But we also have to tackle two other notions, faith and beliefs, how they're similar, how they're different. So I'll just go through it briefly, okay? So let's begin by talking about faith. Faith as a vital part of our humanity. So again, we begin etymologically with an etymological description. Faith from the Latin fiducia. I'm thinking about the Latin word fiducia, means trust. And I'd like to emphasize this. Before faith is something that your brain tells you, okay, it's head knowledge. Before it can be head knowledge, it's a relationship of trust. And trust is an essential human quality. If you didn't learn how to trust when you were a baby, an infant, a very young person, then it's very difficult to have even religious faith, actually. See? So, faith could be thought of as one's trust and hope that, let's say, you are worthy of love, that someone loves you. Okay, that's the very basic trust that we have to learn in our childhood. Faith as trust is necessary for us to be whole humans who can have healthy relationships of friendship and love. Now, faith is also the basis of all religion and spirituality. Religion being the outer shell, spirituality being the heart or kernel of that uh, religious shell. Okay, human faith, okay, the capacity to trust and to hope, is the basis, the foundation of all religion, of all spirituality. You cannot have any meaningful religion or spirituality without faith. Faith is trust, I'd like to emphasize, okay? So, faith is another word to describe the core of all religion and spirituality. So, religion, spirituality's emphasis on having faith in something or in someone means that it's counseling people in that religious and spiritual tradition to have the trust or the hope that there is a loving, gracious, greater force known as God in our Christian tradition out there. So, faith is trust. It's also based on a relationship of trust with God, of course, or a greater something, with our religious tradition, with people who belong to the religious tradition, people whom we respect, some of whom are characterized by faith, deep faith, and it's also a relationship of trust with the world and the whole universe, the whole cosmos. So let's try to define faith now. So, any kind of faith, even religious faith, begins with an attitude of trust. Trust in what? Trust that life is not meaningless but meaningful. This is the basic meaning of faith, that there is meaning in life. Of course, you can never prove this conclusively. That's why some people give up on life. They think that life has become meaningless, they kill themselves, they sink into depression and all that. So, this is one reason why faith is defined as a belief in things one cannot see, because even if we can't conclusively prove that life is meaningful, we trust that it is. And of course, if we are in the Christian tradition, we trust that life has meaning because God, in spite of all the sufferings of life, all the challenges of life, God is there that supports us and gives life meaning. Okay. So ultimately, faith is a trust and hope that life and reality are ultimately gracious, worthy of being lived. And I base this on um, theologian Hans Kung, who just recently passed away. For some, it means a trust, like if you're a Christian, if you're a Catholic, It means a trust that there's an ultimate reality that is loving and compassionate. That ultimate reality is called God. So, what's the difference between faith and belief, or in the plural, beliefs? If faith is that inner attitude of a trusting commitment, beliefs are ideas and truths. Beliefs are the cognitive content that is integral to our faith. So it's like a more cognitive thing that you believe in. That is belief. See, trust is an attitude of trust, or faith is an attitude of trust, a heart attitude, first of all. Okay. Belief is like a cognitive head um, uh, thing. Okay. Of course, Vatican II said that there's a hierarchy of truths. Not all truths are equal. There are more important cognitive truths and less important cognitive truths. Okay, so I think I've covered everything. I see that we've reached the 55-minute mark, but uh, this is one of the ways by which I will try to communicate to you what I think are the most important things. So I'd like you to really put a great value on these lectures, because these are the most important things I'd like you to keep in mind, keep in heart, remember. And many times it's not enough to listen to these things one time, but repeat them in order to learn them well. And I'd like to quote a Latin proverb, one of my favorite ones: repetitio mater studiorum. And that's translated as repetition is the mother of all learning. It means you cannot learn if you don't repeat. If something is really worth learning, you have to repeat it. Okay, so again, these are the most important things I want you to keep in mind as we begin this course, and I'll see you next time. Thank you for your listening.